This video is brought to you by Remarkable. You might be surprised by how many of the surfaces that surround you inside of a building are graphic images, basically printouts from a computer. In a way, sometimes we live inside an envelope of printed pictures. This is obvious when we stand next to a billboard outside or against printed out wallpaper. But more covertly, carpets are often computer-controlled dye prints. This is a process which could easily be set up to create any picture that you want, but instead designers and carpet companies, they tend to choose more abstract patterns, like the one in this hallway. And this is probably for good reason. It would probably be a little strange to walk on pictures of your family all the time, but some companies will do that for you. Countertops or cabinets are sometimes made in a similar way, where the wood or the marble pattern is purely something to be printed, in the same way that you'd print something at home on your inkjet printer. While the technical processes for producing these illusionistic materials, they're a little bit more recently developed, the impulse to surround ourselves in a giant image isn't. Before we head into our metaverse surrounded by depictions of virtual environments, murals and cave paintings are some of our first recorded marks of civilization. Or even like things like the Nazca lines are ancient graphic marks on the earth that transform the ground into a drawing tablet that faces toward the sky. But in the 1960s, something new and unique started to emerge, where colorful, painted parts of the environment found new life by wrapping surfaces with solid blocks of color and text. This emerging trend represented a collapse between the fields of architecture and graphic design. It should probably be noted that this practice is particularly out of character for architects who are notoriously scared of color. But by fully embracing this trend with a passion, these inhabitable graphics, they ushered a renewed interest in colorful shapes to transform space. This practice became known as Supergraphics, due to the monumental size of the installations that they took on. In the practice of designing and creating supergraphics, the printed page of graphic design is substituted for the surface of buildings, where bold colors and simple shapes transform your perceptions of depth and of surface. In many interior design books at the time, you might find suggestions of including giant graphic orange and brown bands to be able to tie your room together. But the practice isn't just limited to domestic spaces. Architecture and its production is pretty slow and pretty static, but supergraphics operate on a completely different frequency through paint. Paint can be changed quickly and easily, and when it does change, it can drastically alter our understanding of a space. Consider this building that I'm in now. It's called the Madliner House, and it functioned as the home of the Graham Foundation in Chicago. The current exhibit is by Barbara Stoufferker-Solomon, a pioneer in the practice of supergraphics. The installation completely transforms the 1902 interiors of this prairie-style mansion. The colors, shapes, and obscured large-scale letters, they envelop you as you move through the rooms. They wrap surfaces and don't care about the distinction between walls or ceilings. The blocks of color work with the architecture, sometimes obscuring boundaries between things, but other times drawing attention to pre-existing elements. So the artist starts with a series of sketches of what she thinks the space will be, and this show is titled Exits Exist. And so the whole show is about putting the letters of those two words across the space. E, X, I, S, and T. So the process involves translating a drawing onto a space, and you'd have to draw the drawing like you'd be drafting, like an architect would draft, onto an actual wall. And a drawing has a very, very fine tolerance, but a building maybe doesn't. So there's this difficult translation process that includes striking lines, as well as maybe putting a string with a pen to create the perfect circles and lines exactly where they need to go. The bold scheme also creates visual connections to new freestanding objects like the one that I'm sitting on that aren't attached to the walls. And by using the same colors and shapes, these objects become part of the cohesive system. The system includes the traditional architectural elements like walls and floors, but also expands to include other things not always considered part of the architecture. I take a lot of notes in a lot of different situations. I'm a professor, a designer, an administrator, and a YouTuber, and it's hard to keep all of my notes and sketches straight. Sometimes I'm in front of my computer at a Zoom call, sometimes I'm in a lecture, or other times I just want to sketch something that I encounter in the world. Before the remarkable paper tablet, all those notes and sketches existed in 3 different areas: a digital notes app, a notepad, and a sketchbook. But the paper tablet can help you finally get organized and clear the clutter to allow your creative production to blossom unencumbered. It's basically like digital paper that brings the best of both worlds: the feel of writing with a pencil on paper, with the digital archiving and retrieval. It's cloud-based and connects seamlessly with Google Drive storage. And because it's all in one place, I never have to remember where I wrote something. It will translate my writing into text that can be easily pasted into scripts or searched. It is truly one of the most seamless situations that I have found between my thoughts, recording, and retrieval. For all the architects out there, drawing on one of the paper tablets feels just like drawing on a drawing board surface back in the old days. It gives just the perfect amount of friction to the stylus and allows you to press down a little bit into it. I'm being completely honest that it feels like drawing on a Borco drawing board or a sketch pad that has other sheets of paper underneath. I want to encourage you to try out the paper tablet for yourself. Use the link down in the description to purchase your own and get sketching and writing your own creative ideas right away. While this house is no longer used as a house, it's an exhibition space, and the bold abstract colors around me might not be something that you would want in your house. Supergraphics became super popular throughout the 1970s and the 1980s. The author of this work, Barbara Stofaker-Solomon, she's credited with initiating this entire trend with her work at a retreat called Sea Ranch in California. The architect of Sea Ranch, Charles Moore, he commissioned Solomon to rework the locker rooms of the multi-building complex. The architect wasn't satisfied with the way that the interiors of this locker room space turned out after the construction. He thought they looked boring and cheap, so he wanted to test some quick solutions to be able to enhance the architecture. Solomon has a particular background that she credits with influencing her novel approach to solving this problem that was set up by Moore. Firstly, she's a dancer who naturally thinks about space differently than, say, an architect would. For a dancer, space is something to be filled with bodies moving fluidly through it. Those architectural distinctions that I talked about earlier at the exhibition, like between the surfaces of the walls and floors, they don't really matter to a dancer in the same way. Rather, it's more about how their body moves through space. Solomon also studied painting and the power that paint can have in creating illusionistic scenes. But most importantly, she also studied graphic design, typography, and letter forms. I think in retrospect, it's pretty easy to see that when all of these practices, when they come together inside of a single person, they could yield a new way of thinking about space. Solomon says that at Sea Ranch, she was playing with painting and with space, moving through the space, one arrow up the stairs, another arrow down the stairs, moving with a striped blue wave, making the Pacific wave outside the building crash over and into the building, and making a person run up the stairs to get there. In a way, she created a whole story around the building using only paint, a story that communicates her interpretation of the space, and it also brings in others to allow them to read into it too. This exhibition, though, wasn't painted by Solomon herself. Rather, it was painted by Andrew McClellan and Kelsey Dalton of Heart and Bones Signs, who create hand-painted signs across the city of Chicago. The fact that this was painted by a sign company, I think, underscores the connection that Supergraphics have with signage and with billboards, which is another time when graphic design and architecture collapse together. Solomon says that I see a relationship between Supergraphics and billboards. Both are printed or pasted into the exteriors of buildings. In the 1960s, architect Robert Venturi, a friend of Charles Moore, said that architecture is a sign, a decorated box for selling something. Some of you might be familiar with Robert Venturi as part of the firm Venturi Scott Brown, who declared that buildings, to them at least, could be categorized as either ducts or decorated sheds. The distinction being that either the form of the building matters and the form is expressive, or a building is like a simple box with decoration and information that's just applied to it. They themselves preferred to think of a building as decorated boxes, and they also dabbled in supergraphics to explore this idea that billboards and architecture can go hand in hand. Their design for the big box retail store Best included graphic flowers printed on the exterior. Also, other Best stores designed by site architects explored this idea by printing the name of the store all across the outside in overlapping letters. In 1970, the Japanese architect Minoru Takayama designed a building in Shinjuku, Tokyo, called Building Number 2. This building gained notoriety when critic Charles Jenks included it on the cover of his book, The Language of Postmodern Architecture, which was originally published in 1977. The building has quite a complicated form that results from a complex program coupled with an attitude toward trying to take full advantage of the buildable volume of the site in the dense context of Tokyo. The convoluted form is complemented with a colorful graphic scheme, and the two play off of one another. While the form of the building is, relatively fixed and predetermined to an extent, the way that these forms interact with a graphic can be exuberant and experimental in a totally new and different way. Limiting your design energy to the surface, it also makes a lot of sense financially. We were in a pretty big recession during the 1970s, and colors can change pretty easily and cheaply, where the superficial application might be allowed to be more exuberant and bold, while the building itself is simple and flexible in comparison. All of this added up to supergraphics becoming an extremely fashionable trend during these decades in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as a solution for almost anything at the time. While some of the enthusiasm for the practice has waned over the years, along the way we discovered that these bold graphics can be good for a lot of things, and we do it even today. There were surveys of employees' opinions on the graphic installment at the Sunkist Corporation offices, for instance. Almost all the employees reported that they believed that an attractive work environment was important, and that the colorful surroundings were preferable to drab ones. And today you can find supergraphics used in branding or wayfinding, promoting political ideas, or brightening up otherwise dull space and activating it with color. This practice can have a strong social component to it as well. For relatively low monetary investment, you can quickly add a layer of art to a public space to showcase just how much people care about it and to inject energy into a place. The architect and historian Klaus Herdig writes, "The decorative aspirations of supergraphic not only bring a drab wall to life, but by their gigantic scale and uncommon colorfulness, provide a psychological and perceptual unity to an otherwise disturbed urban fabric. Hence the huge mural, by quasi-architectural means, renders an eminently social service." And a great example of that might include Baro Mistra, a team based in Madrid that's composed of an architect, a designer, an illustrator, and an artist that uses paint to completely transform public urban spaces. They have a great example in Guadalajara, Mexico, an almost 5,000 square meter area that's composed of 3 buildings and then a large square, where supergraphics turn one of the most disadvantaged zones of the city into a vibrant community space. To execute the design, they engaged with local students, folks between jobs, and volunteers. The design itself is inspired by local artistic traditions, and it centers around a circular drawing. The decoration travels up onto the facades of the building on the sides of the square, and this connects the ground surface with the buildings to create a visually cohesive complex. It operates at this intermediate scale between individual buildings and then the city to be able to provide pockets of cohesive design where there weren't really any previously. Today, there's also a really interesting supergraphic exploration happening at a firm called Outpost Office, who uses GPS-controlled field marking robots to draw site-specific 1-to-1 scale drawings that are in rural or urban areas. They use robots that are normally used for painting football fields to create supergraphics on the ground in order to prompt people to engage with spaces in new ways. The first of these experiments took place at an artist colony to provide a stage and seating arrangement for outdoor performance. You might think of these as like Nazca lines for today, using the latest in ground graphic technology. Their next iteration came to downtown Chicago, where the same robot technology was used to create a series of architectural scale urban land paintings that were in the neighborhoods of North Lawndale and Pilsen. The project is called Cover the Grid and uses these temporary space-making techniques to test their impact for activating public spaces in the city. Cover the Grid produces a dynamic, temporary civic space without any real material waste or demolition costs. While paint won't solve all the world's problems or magically make bad architecture good, it is important to recognize that sometimes it can have a real and measurable impact. It might be the first test of an idea, or just an initial impactful first step to make something that's bigger. Or it might be helpful in making sense of or challenging our understanding of a space until it's painted over with another bold graphic experiment. What are some of your favorite examples of supergraphics? Let us know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll continue to fill your feed with architectural content on Thursdays. In the meantime, check out some of our other videos. See you over there.